Why was everyone here? Why had a private review turned into a spectacle? Embry Callister sat rigid at the lone table, shoulders squared, hands trembling beneath the surface where no one could see. The basketball court of Mercer County Community Center had been rearranged into a mock courtroom, and now, somehow, 200 townspeople filled the bleachers. They weren't here for justice. They were here to watch her burn. At 16, Embry had never felt so utterly exposed. Her essay, her college application, her chance at something beyond this small town, had been dragged into the light, and the words she'd written about her mother had become the weapon they used against her. They laughed when she claimed her mother was a Navy SEAL, the superintendent announced, holding the essay aloft like evidence of a crime. His voice boomed across the sound system, filling every corner of the gymnasium. We're here to determine whether this student has fabricated military service for personal gain. This is a serious matter, Miss Callister. Serious. That was the word they chose. But in the seats above, Embry heard the whispers, the soft hiss of amusement traveling row to row. Pathological liar. She made it all up. Her mom's a ghost story. The words clung to her skin. Embry's eyes searched the crowd until they found her grandfather, Colonel Thaddeus Callister, silver crew cut, back straight despite his years, a man who had stood in deserts and jungles and boardrooms of generals and now sat quietly in the back of a gymnasium where his granddaughter was being dismantled by rumor. He didn't move, didn't speak, but then she saw it, the faintest nod, their signal since childhood: stay strong, give nothing away. Her breath steadied for a moment. The English teacher stepped forward, clutching a handful of printed pages. Ms. Winslade looked as though she'd been dragged into a role she did not want. Her voice shook as she read from the essay. While other mothers attended PTA meetings, mine was deployed with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. While other mothers taught their daughters to bake, mine taught me to swim with weighted ankles and hold my breath for 3 minutes. My mother, Commander Zephr Callister, was among the first women to complete SEAL training. A murmur rippled across the gym. Then the laughter came, short, sharp, ugly. That's enough, Superintendent Hargrove cut in smoothly, his smile thin, predatory. Dr. Fleming, your professional assessment. The psychiatrist adjusted his glasses, every movement calculated, practiced. Textbook compensatory fantasy, extended absence of the mother reframed as heroic service. The child invents what she cannot accept, a defense mechanism. Embry's jaw tightened. I haven't lied, she said softly, her voice shook but carried, and I haven't been abandoned. Then explain this. Hargrove held up another document, official-looking, stamped and signed. Your mother's naval service record, administrative specialist, honorable discharge 8 years ago, no combat zones, no deployments, not a single notation of special operations. Silence pressed down. Embry's pulse hammered, but she kept her face still. That's her cover record, she whispered. The laughter exploded this time, rolling across the gym like fire. Cover record, as though she were a character from a bad movie. Colonel Callister, Hargrove turned his gaze to the back row. As her guardian, as Zephyr's father, would you care to clarify? The colonel didn't move, didn't blink. I have nothing to add to my granddaughter's statement. Nothing to add or nothing to correct. Again the glance at his watch. Again that strange anticipation in his eyes. Embry closed her own, if only to escape the stares for a second. And in that darkness, she heard echoes of her childhood, midnight phone calls, her mother's voice distorted across lines that weren't supposed to exist. The mermaid swims at midnight. The eagle returns at dawn. Childish code, proof of life, proof she wasn't alone. But that wasn't something she could tell this crowd. Mayor Sutcliffe rose, adjusting his tie as if the formality gave him authority. Perhaps you can enlighten us, Miss Callister. If your mother's service was so classified, surely you know details, missions, training, something more than bedtime stories. The questions came harder now, demands for proof, for detail. Embry answered what she could with the precision she had been taught. High altitude, high opening requires parachute deployment soon after jump. High altitude, low opening freefall until 2,000 feet. Less canopy time, greater precision. That drew a long pause. Even Warren Pike, the veteran in the corner, shifted, studying her more carefully. But Hargrove dismissed it with a wave. Movies, games, anyone could parrot that. Dr. Fleming nodded sagely. Yes, elaborate fantasies can become alarmingly detailed. That level of specificity only reinforces my diagnosis. The crowd leaned forward like spectators at a play, waiting for the next line, the next humiliation. Someone's phone flashed. Another whispered liar loud enough for the word to sting. Ms. Winslade looked stricken but powerless. Then Hargrove produced a photograph. A woman in crisp navy dress blues, 10 years younger, bearing Embry's same eyes. This is Zephr Callister's official service photo. Administrative, support staff. Not exactly SEAL material, is she? The laughter was crueler this time. Something cracked inside Embry, her mask slipped. You don't know anything about her, she snapped, her voice breaking. We know she isn't here, Hargrove said smoothly. We know she never showed up at a single school event. We know fabricating service disrespects true veterans, like Mr. Pike. The old veteran's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Not yet. And still, the faint thump of helicopter blades in the distance. Embry glanced at her grandfather. He checked his watch again. 4:13. His expression never changed, but something had shifted. Hargrove leaned forward, savoring the moment. This isn't about punishment. It's about getting you the help you need. Intensive therapy has been recommended, and your record will reflect this fabrication. That way no college will be misled. The gym buzzed. Phones lifted. People recording, hungry to capture the collapse of a girl too quiet, too strange, too easy to despise. Embry's throat tightened. She fought the urge to cry, to scream, to run. Instead, she said the one thing she had always kept buried. She told me someday I'd understand. Someday you'd all know that she existed, that she was real. Oh, Hargrove leaned closer, his smile curdled into mockery. Then tell us, where is this phantom mother of yours? Where is she right now? The doors opened. 6 figures entered, boots striking linoleum in unison. The gymnasium froze, silence falling like a wave. At the center of the formation, dark hair pulled tight, uniform gleaming with ribbons most here had never seen, was Commander Zephr Callister. For the first time in her life, Embry didn't feel small. What happens when the lie everyone believed shatters in a single step? The doors to the community center swung wide, hinges groaning, air rushing in as if the outside world had been waiting for its cue. 6 figures moved through the entrance, their cadence sharp, unyielding. Boots on linoleum echoed like a drumbeat. Not a rush, not a scramble, precision, deliberate, trained. Every head turned, every whisper died. At their center, Commander Zephr Callister advanced. Embry could hardly breathe. For years her mother had been a flicker of memory, a voice across a bad line, a phantom presence hidden by the word classified. Now she was here, flesh and bone, moving with the quiet ferocity of someone who had lived too long in shadows. Her hair was pulled back, regulation tight. Her eyes, Embry's eyes, swept across the gymnasium in one calm, assessing glance. Rows of townspeople, teachers, politicians, gawkers. Her daughter, alone at the table, her father in the back waiting. Recognition locked them together, daughter and mother. Warren Pike, the veteran, reacted first. His body straightened in his chair, instinct overriding disbelief. His right hand rose in salute, sharp despite years of weakness, his eyes wet. Zephyr acknowledged him with the slightest nod. Then she moved forward, her team flowing around her, flanking, scanning, positioning. Operators in every detail, faceless to the crowd but unmistakable to anyone who knew what discipline looked like. Embry couldn't move. Her chest felt tight, as though every word she'd defended for years had suddenly grown too heavy. She had imagined this moment, prayed for it, cursed it, doubted it. But imagining a mother's return and witnessing her entrance were two entirely different storms. Zephyr reached the superintendent's table. Without a word, she placed a folder down. The red border, the executive seals, declassified markings in bold letters. Hargrove's mouth opened, but no sound came. "These were declassified at 600 this morning," Zephyr said. Her voice was steady, carrying across the room. No theatrics, no shouting, just authority, years of it. The gym was silent. Phones lowered, almost ashamed to capture what was unfolding. Zephyr opened the folder, one page at a time, deliberate, precise. Documents stamped with levels of clearance that no civilian should ever see. Mission reports, black lines blotting out more than they revealed. Commendations signed by hands that only a handful of officials in Washington could claim. Photographs with presidents, 3 of them. And at the back, one final page, an executive order, fresh. The ink barely dry. Recognition of a specialized unit of female operators, active 15 years. Colonel Thaddeus Callister finally rose. His voice, when it came, carried weight. "My daughter could not defend herself, but she ensured her daughter would never suffer the same silence." The words landed like stone. Hargrove swallowed hard, his tone suddenly coated in syrup. "Commander Callister, had we known." Zephyr silenced him with a raised hand, not harsh but final. "My daughter," she said, turning to face the crowd, "has shown more courage in this room than I've seen in combat. She told the truth when lying would have been easier. She stood alone. You laughed." The weight of her gaze passed over them. Teachers, townsfolk, peers, all the faces that had burned holes into Embry for years. "For 15 years I served in silence," Zephyr continued, her words cutting through the stillness. "That silence cost birthdays, school plays, milestones. It cost my daughter her mother. She carried a truth she could not prove, and still, she did not bend." Embry's breath shook, her throat ached. Warren Pike wheeled forward, his medals catching the light. His voice carried the old hardness of combat. "Some of you mocked her, but I want you to look at the ribbons on Commander Callister's uniform. Look close, and tell me what you've done that gives you the right." No one spoke. The silence was heavier than laughter had ever been. Ms. Winslade, the teacher who had been forced to read the essay aloud, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pages from the table where they had been left like contraband. She placed them back in Embry's hands. "This deserves more than an A," she whispered. "This deserves to be heard." Embry tried to stand. Her legs wavered, stiff from hours of stillness, but she rose anyway. And then her mother's arms. The uniform rough against her cheek, the embrace tight, unyielding, crushing years of distance into one impossible moment. "I'm sorry it took so long," Zephyr murmured into her daughter's hair, "but I'm here now." Embry closed her eyes. For the first time in years, the world didn't feel like a battle she was losing. Hargrove tried one last time. "This meeting isn't officially." "This meeting is adjourned," Colonel Callister said, voice firm, final. The operators shifted, forming a corridor, an honor guard of silence. Mother, daughter, and grandfather walked through it together, past the crowd that had once hungered for humiliation, past faces pale with shame, some still clutching phones that would never see upload, past the remnants of laughter that curdled now into silence. And then they were gone. The gym doors shut, the sound of boots fatting. Inside, 200 people sat in a room no longer theirs, forced to confront what it meant to doubt, to mock, to choose ridicule over faith. Outside, Embry drew a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The sky above was wide. The helicopters that had brought her mother here were already lifting away, their thrum fading into the horizon. She looked up at her mother. The living proof of every word she had been told was a lie. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. How does a community recover from being proven wrong in front of itself? The Mercer County Community Center had been designed for basketball games and PTA fundraisers, not reckonings. Yet in the days that followed, the air inside those walls seemed to carry the echo of boots and the sting of silence. 200 people had gathered expecting a spectacle. They left with shame pressed into their ribs. By nightfall, the story had already leaked. Someone's shaky phone recording captured the moment the SEAL team entered, their formation precise, their commander at the center. The video spread fast, first through the town's group chats, then onto the wider net. Words traveled quicker than any official release could contain. She was telling the truth. The mother's real. Commander Callister. Embry saw none of it at first. She sat in her grandfather's truck, staring out the passenger window at the passing trees. Her mother sat behind her, silent, her presence too large for words. The drive was only 20 minutes, but it stretched. When they pulled into the driveway of the Callister home, Embry didn't move. The porch light glowed warm against the dark. She remembered waiting under that very light as a child, staring into shadows, convincing herself her mother might walk out of them one night. For years, the porch had been a vigil. Tonight, it was an ending. The colonel killed the engine. Inside, he said simply. Embry opened the door, legs stiff. The gravel crunched under her shoes. She felt her mother's shadow fall across her shoulder as they walked. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every frame on the wall, the colonel in uniform, Embry as a toddler, Zephr in a photo that had never revealed the truth, seemed to watch them as they entered. Embry set her essay on the kitchen table, the paper that had started it all. It looked small, fragile, absurd compared to the storm it had unleashed. Zephr touched the corner of it, her hand steady. "You wrote this." Embry's voice cracked. "They called it fantasy." Her mother's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. It was truth. That makes it dangerous. Embry wanted to ask everything at once. Where had she been? Why had she stayed away? Why hadn't she fought sooner? But the questions stuck like stones in her throat. Instead, she said the only thing that mattered in that moment. "You're real." Zephr pulled her close again. No explanations, no apologies, just the weight of presence. For Embry, that was enough. For now. The next morning, Mercer County shifted. Teachers avoided eye contact. Neighbors waved stiffly, their gestures carrying awkward respect instead of scorn. Social media feeds filled with performative pride, sudden posts celebrating our hometown hero, even from those who had laughed loudest. Mayor Sutcliffe held a press conference. His tie was straight, his voice polished, but his eyes betrayed unease. "We are proud," he said, "to have been the birthplace of Commander Zephr Callister, a trailblazer whose contributions reflect the highest values of service." The crowd applauded, yet Embry knew what lingered beneath their applause: guilt, regret, fear of being remembered for the wrong side of the truth. At school, the transformation was stranger. Hallways that once swallowed her in silence now parted. Students stared, whispered, some even offered apologies they didn't mean. "We didn't know. You should have said. That was crazy, your mom, a SEAL." Embry kept walking. Their words slid off, meaningless compared to the years she'd carried silence alone. But in quiet moments between classes, in the library, lying awake at night, the weight shifted. For so long she had fought to defend a truth no one wanted. Now that truth was undeniable. And yet she didn't feel victorious. She felt raw, unsteady. One evening she found her grandfather in his study. The desk was covered in letters, envelopes opened, pages spread. "They've already started arriving," he said. "From who?" He handed her one. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged. "My mother served. They said she was admin too. We never knew what she really did. When your story came out, I finally understood why she missed everything." Embry read it twice, then another, and another. Stories from children, spouses, families who had lived in the same half-truth, the same silence. "You weren't alone," the colonel said quietly. "Not really, just unseen." Embry set the letters down carefully as though they might break. She realized then, this wasn't only her story. It had always been bigger. Later that week, Zephyr sat with her on the porch. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the sky. For the first time, her mother looked at ease. "Do you miss it?" Embry asked suddenly. Zephyr turned her head. "Miss what?" "The missions, the team." Her mother considered, the silence stretching. "I miss the clarity," she admitted. "Out there, everything has a purpose. Here, it's messier." She glanced at Embry. "But I don't miss the absence. 15 years of being a ghost in your life was too high a price." Embry swallowed hard. Was it worth it? The question hung. Zephyr's jaw tightened. "For the missions, yes. For the women who will come after, yes. But for you," she reached for her daughter's hand. "I'm still calculating that debt." Embry shook her head. "There's no debt. You did what you had to do, so did I." For the first time, Zephyr's composure cracked, just slightly. A breath caught, a tear glimmered, but she turned her face away before it could fall. Inside, the phone rang. Reporters, politicians, military liaisons, everyone wanted a piece of the story. But on the porch, mother and daughter sat in silence, the world's noise kept at bay for one fragile hour. Mercer County adjusted slowly. The community center was renamed Callister Veterans Hall. Plaques were ordered, flags raised. The same people who had mocked Embry now claimed pride in her name. But not everyone accepted the change so easily. Some muttered that secrets didn't excuse lies. Some resented that a classified life had disrupted their tidy sense of truth. And in all of it, Embry walked a strange line. She was no longer invisible, but visibility was a weight of its own. Every glance, every whisper, every headline reminded her that truth came with cost. Still, on nights when she doubted, when she lay awake replaying the laughter, the scorn, the shame, she remembered the corridor of boots, the way her mother had stood at her side. And she remembered this. Sometimes vindication doesn't roar, it walks into a room. What kind of life demands you erase yourself from your own story? Zephr Callister didn't talk much about the past. Even after the reveal, even after the room full of doubters had been silenced, her instinct was still to lock the truth away. But one night, weeks after Mercer County had begun to rebuild its pride, she sat across from her daughter in the dark kitchen and chose to break a rule she had lived by for 15 years. Embry had been sorting through letters, the kind that came daily now, messages from families who carried invisible burdens. She read them silently, lips pressing tight, eyes glassy. Finally, she asked the question she'd been holding back. "What was it like?" Her mother's spoon paused above her untouched tea. For a long moment she didn't answer. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Then Zephyr said quietly, "It was like breathing underwater. Everything was sharp, focused, but you knew you couldn't stay there forever." Embry leaned forward. "Tell me." And Zephyr did. She began with the desert, a place without names, only coordinates. Nights so cold the sand felt like glass beneath their boots, days so hot even the rifles burned. She was 27 when they dropped in. The first mission where her name no longer existed. "7 of us," she said, voice low, steady. "All women. No one outside a handful of men in Washington even knew we were real. Our job was simple on paper. Extract a hostage from a compound outside Fallujah, but paper never tells the truth." Embry's hand stilled on the letters. She listened, every word etching into her. They jumped at 200 hours, the desert wind tearing at their parachutes. Zephyr's canopy snapped open above her, the earth black beneath. Her altimeter glowed faintly. The radio clicked once, a signal. No words. Words could betray. The landing was hard, sand swallowing their knees. No sound, no hesitation. Each operator checked her gear, checked her sister's gear, then they moved, like shadows across dunes. The compound was ringed with rusted trucks, half-buried tires, a fire burning low. Men's voices carried, slurred with sleep and liquor. Zephyr remembered the silence of that moment, her heart hammering, her breath shallow against the rebreather, every instinct screaming that one mistake would mean not just death but erasure. No one would claim them, no flag-draped coffins, just absence. Inside, the hostage was chained. An aid worker, American, beaten, barely breathing. His eyes widened when he saw them, disbelief and salvation colliding. "We cut him loose," Zephyr told her daughter. "He whispered thank you over and over, but we weren't finished. We had to disappear without a trace." The exfil route collapsed when a sentry woke early. A shout cracked through the night. Gunfire followed, sharp, chaotic. Zephyr's team moved with ruthless precision. 2 shots, 3, silence. Then sprinting across sand, carrying the hostage, every step a gamble. "They never caught us," she said simply. "But they never knew who saved him either. The report credited a unit that didn't exist. A shadow on paper. That's what we were." Embry swallowed hard. "And you couldn't tell me." Her mother shook her head. "If I had, it would have made you a target. Anyone who knew the truth became leverage. You were safer thinking I was gone." The words landed heavy. Embry looked down at the letters again. Families who had lived the same silence. Children who had wondered if absence was abandonment. "Was it worth it?" Embry asked, her voice sharp now, demanding. Zephyr's gaze held hers. "For him, the man we carried out of that compound, yes. For the women who followed, yes. But for you," her voice cracked for the first time, "that's the calculation I could never finish." Embry's chest ached. She wanted to argue, to say there was no debt, no calculation. But part of her understood. Some wounds didn't vanish with truth. Some lingered. The mission replayed in her mind. Her mother running through darkness, faceless, nameless, carrying someone else's life while giving up her own. Zephyr reached across the table, her hand rough, scarred. "You need to understand something, Embry. Silence isn't weakness. It's sometimes the highest form of strength. We endured it so others wouldn't have to, but that doesn't make it easy to live with." Embry nodded slowly. For the first time, she saw her mother not just as a phantom who had returned, but as a soldier who had carried impossible choices. Later that night, Embry lay awake, replaying the story. She thought of the compound, the gunfire, the nameless rescue. But what struck her most wasn't the mission itself. It was the loneliness in her mother's voice as she told it. The cost of truth wasn't just absence, it was silence. And now, in the wake of revelation, silence was breaking. What happens when silence finally breaks and everyone is listening? 6 months after the community center, Embry found herself standing not in a gymnasium of doubters, but in the marbled chamber of Congress. The nameplate before her read Miss Zephr Callister. The microphones were polished, the lights unrelenting, the cameras waiting. She had imagined this moment in nightmares, all those faces staring down. Only this time they weren't jeering. They were waiting, hungry not for her humiliation but for her truth. Her mother sat in the gallery above, uniform sharp, posture perfect, but her eyes softer than Embry had ever seen them. The colonel was beside her, his pride disguised as sternness. Representative Alvarez leaned into her microphone. "Miss Callister, you may begin your statement." Embry's pulse pounded. Her hands trembled against the paper she'd prepared. The same hands that had clutched her essay in that community center. The same hands that had been mocked for writing the truth. She looked up, hundreds of eyes, no laughter, just expectation. "I was 16 when they told me I was a liar," she began. Her voice shook, but she didn't pause. "I wrote about my mother, about who she was, what she had done, and they said I had made it all up." The room stilled. They didn't know that some truths are buried for reasons that have nothing to do with shame. They didn't know that my mother's life was classified, that for 15 years she served in places she couldn't speak of, with people she couldn't name. They didn't know the silence wasn't a lie, it was her duty, and I carried it. Embry paused, not for effect, but because the words themselves pressed too heavy against her chest. Silence is heavy, she continued softly. It isolates. It convinces you that maybe you're the one who's wrong, that maybe the absence really is abandonment. I believed, but I was alone in that belief, until the day she walked back into the room. Zephyr's jaw clenched in the gallery. Her eyes glistened. Embry set the paper down. She didn't need it. My mother never asked for recognition. She only wanted to serve. But there are hundreds, thousands of families like mine. Families who carry truths they cannot say. Children who grow up doubting their own memories, their own worth, because the world insists what they know is impossible. These families deserve acknowledgement, not pity, not suspicion, just the dignity of truth. Silence followed. Then slowly applause swelled, breaking through the chamber until it echoed off the marble. Lawmakers, staff, visitors, the same kind of people who had doubted, now on their feet. Representative Alvarez's voice steadied the moment. Miss Callister, your testimony will help shape policy for generations of service members. Thank you for your courage. Embry nodded once, her throat tight. She gathered her notes, hands steadier now, and stepped down. But her role wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, her name appeared in headlines. Teen who defended SEAL mother testifies on Capitol Hill. Daughter of classified operative speaks for families in silence. Reporters hounded her, chasing quotes, trying to pin her story into headlines neat enough for clicks. Embry learned quickly what her mother had meant by controlling the narrative. Some voices wanted to make her a symbol. Others wanted to make her a scandal, but neither felt true. One evening, after a day of interviews, she collapsed on her bed, exhaustion crashing over her. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, notifications, tags. She silenced it and buried her face in her pillow. When she lifted her head, her mother was standing in the doorway. No words, just watching. Embry groaned. I'm not like you, I can't carry this. Zephyr stepped into the room, sat at the edge of the bed. You already are. Embry shook her head. I'm just a girl who wrote an essay. I didn't choose this. Her mother's hand touched her shoulder. Neither did I, not at first. I was chosen, tested, pushed. And for years I thought that meant strength was measured in what I could endure. But you've taught me something different. Embry frowned. What? That strength is sometimes measured in what you reveal, what you share. You stood alone when no one believed you. That's harder than combat. Embry blinked against the sting in her eyes. You're just saying that. No, Zephyr said firmly. I've seen combat and I've seen you. I know which one I'd rather face. Embry laughed through the ache. For once it didn't feel hollow. Letters kept coming, piles of them. The colonel's study looked like a mailroom. Stories from children who had lived in shadows, wives who had buried their grief in silence, husbands who had raised kids alone without explanation. Embry read each one. Some broke her, some steadied her, but all of them reminded her this wasn't just her burden anymore. It was theirs, and she could carry it for them. At a small press conference in Washington, she read aloud from one letter. My father told me bedtime stories about mountains and rivers, but now I realize he was talking about places he couldn't name. Thank you for proving he wasn't a liar. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She read another and another. Afterward, a young woman in Naval Academy whites approached her, barely older than Embry herself, eyes sharp, posture stiff with respect. Your testimony is required reading for us now, she said. Your mother's record, your words, we wanted to thank you. Embry smiled faintly. I didn't do it for reading lists. Sometimes the messenger changes everything, the cadet replied. The words stuck. That night, Embry sat again on the porch with her mother. The stars stretched endless above, the kind of sky that made the world feel both small and vast. "You asked me once if it was worth it," Zephyr said quietly. "The missions, the sacrifices. I told you the calculation was impossible, but watching you speak, I think maybe it was." Embry leaned against her. For the first time, she believed it too. The silence that had once broken her had become her strength. And now the world was listening. What does it mean to stand in the light after living so long in shadows? The black car hummed down Pennsylvania Avenue, its windows tinted, its silence broken only by the hum of traffic and the faint rustle of uniforms. Inside, 3 generations of Callisters sat side by side. Zephyr, resplendent in her formal dress blues, her ribbons heavy with stories she could barely speak. Colonel Thaddeus, his uniform pressed, his face carved into lines of pride and restraint. And Embry, 17 now, wearing a uniform of her own, not earned through service but honorary, pressed into her hands by the White House itself, an acknowledgement that she too had carried a duty not of her choosing. Embry tugged at the collar, uneasy. "It feels wrong, I didn't serve." Zephyr adjusted the jacket, her touch steady. "You carried silence for 16 years. You bore mockery, isolation, doubt. That's service too." The colonel cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "Tonight is history. Don't waste it worrying about what's deserved. Walk with dignity. The rest will follow." Embry pressed her lips together, nodded, but her chest still tightened. When the car slowed before the White House gates, flashes erupted. Reporters lined the barricades, their voices rising in a frenzy of questions. "Commander Callister, how does it feel? Miss Callister, what will you do next? Colonel, can you comment on policy changes?" Zephyr gave no answer. She never did outside prepared statements. Control of the narrative, that was her shield now. Inside the gates, the chaos melted into order. Marines at attention, staffers guiding them with practiced precision. The White House lit golden against the night. Embry had never seen it like this, alive with ceremony, heavy with meaning. The ballroom was vast, chandeliers gleaming, every table filled with faces from politics, military, media. Uniforms pressed, gowns shimmering, medals pinned. Yet when they entered, a subtle ripple spread. Conversations paused, eyes turned. Warren Pike was waiting at their table, his wheelchair polished, his old cap replaced with a simple suit. He rose, leaning on his cane, and saluted Zephyr. She returned it with crisp precision. Beside him, Ms. Winslade stood nervously, out of place in her modest black dress. The teacher who had once trembled at a microphone now found herself seated at the president's table. Embry smiled faintly. "You made it." Ms. Winslade's hands twisted in her lap. "I still don't understand how." "Because you believed me eventually," Embry said softly. "That matters more than you think." The program began. A presidential aide announced the evening's order. Dinner, speeches, and then the presentation of the Medal of Freedom. But Zephyr barely touched her food. Her eyes flickered often toward the side of the room, where 5 women in formal uniforms stood quietly, a formation without orders. Her old team. Embry followed her gaze. She recognized them, not their names, not their stories, but the way they moved. The stillness in their shoulders, the readiness in their eyes. They were part of her mother's life she would never fully own, yet their presence meant everything. When the president finally rose to speak, the room hushed. His voice carried the practiced cadence of history. "Tonight we recognize not just extraordinary service, but extraordinary sacrifice. Commander Zephr Callister has lived a life in shadow so others could live in light. For 15 years, her existence was classified, her missions unacknowledged, her absence explained away. Yet her dedication never faltered, and now, at last, her story is ours to tell." Applause thundered. Embry's chest ached with it. Zephyr walked to the stage, every step measured, her chin high. The Medal of Freedom gleamed on its cushion, waiting. The president lifted it, placing it carefully around her neck. In that moment, something shifted, not just for her but for every unseen operator whose service had been buried. The applause swelled again, but this time something else happened. The 23 women declassified with her, revealed only weeks before, rose in unison. Different uniforms, different branches, different faces, yet together they stood, silent, visible at last. The effect was electric. The crowd rose with them, a standing ovation that carried not just respect but reverence. Embry's throat closed. She had never seen her mother cry, not once. But when Zephr turned her head slightly, just enough to find her daughter's eyes in the crowd, Embry caught it, the shimmer, the crack in steel. The president finished his remarks, but few heard him. All eyes were on the women, on what had once been ghosts. When the ceremony ended, Zephr returned to their table, the medal heavy on her chest. Warren Pike leaned forward, his voice thick. "Took them long enough." Zephr managed a faint smile. "Better late than never." Ms. Winsley dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, whispering, "I never knew, I never imagined." Embry touched her arm. "Neither did I, not fully." Later, as the crowd mingled, journalists pressing closer, politicians shaking hands, Embry slipped away for air. She found herself near the balcony, the night stretching beyond the White House lawn. Her mother joined her quietly, metal gleaming against her chest. Embry exhaled. "Was it everything you thought?" Zephr studied the horizon. "No, it was more and less. Medals don't change the past, they don't return years, but they tell the world we were here. That matters." Embry nodded slowly. "It matters." Her mother turned, studying her. "And what about you? Do you want this life, the academy, service, legacy?" Embry hesitated. The question pressed heavy. "I don't know yet." Zephr smiled faintly. "Good, don't rush the answer. You deserve to choose for yourself, not because of me." They stood in silence for a long time, the meadow catching moonlight, the city glowing below. And in that stillness, Embry realized something. The world had finally seen her mother, but what mattered more was that her mother was finally here, with her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply stands, and tonight it had stood. What does it mean to choose your own path when the world already expects one for you? The Callister home was quieter now, though quiet was relative. Journalists no longer crowded the driveway, but their calls kept coming. Letters still arrived daily, stacked in neat piles by the colonel's careful hands. Invitations, interviews, conferences, academic panels filled the mailbox. Embry found herself in the middle of it all, no longer invisible, no longer mocked, but also no longer free to just be. Her college acceptance letter to Georgetown was framed on the wall of her room. She had dreamed of political science, of understanding systems, of maybe shaping them. But now, another letter had arrived. This one not from an admissions office, but from the Naval Academy itself. A special appointment, granted on the strength of her unique qualifications and the name Callister. She had stared at it for hours. The seal, the signature, the weight of it, she hadn't applied, she hadn't asked, but it sat there, daring her to decide. One evening she sat at the kitchen table, the letter unopened before her. Her grandfather sat across, glasses perched low, sorting through correspondence. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Annapolis, that's no small thing." Embry shrugged, though her pulse betrayed her. "I didn't ask for it." "Doesn't matter, they see something. Legacy, aptitude. Your mother opened a door, they're asking if you'll walk through it." Embry's jaw tightened. "Or if I'll become her." The colonel finally looked up, his gaze sharp. "You're not her, you'll never be her, but you are Callister. That means something, always will." Embry pushed back from the table, restless. "And if I don't want it to? If I want to be something else?" The colonel's expression softened just slightly. "Then you choose. That's the point of what your mother fought for. That's the point of what you fought for, choice." Later, Embry climbed out onto the roof, her old habit. The stars stretched endless, unjudging. She had sat here countless nights as a child, scanning the horizon for a mother who never came. Now her mother sat beside her, uniform crisp even in the dark. "You've been quiet," Zephyr said. Embry didn't answer at first. She ran her fingers along the appointment letter in her lap. Finally, she whispered, "Do you want me to go?" Her mother turned, her profile etched against starlight. "I want you to be free." "That's not an answer." Zephyr sighed. "I worry about legacy, about the weight of it. I don't want you to carry mine like a burden." Embry pressed, "But if I did, if I went, would it make you proud?" Her mother's silence lingered. Then softly, "You already do." Embry blinked hard, her chest ached. "What if I'm not built for it? What if I fail?" Zephyr reached over, steadying her hand. "Then you fail on your own terms, and you rise. That's all anyone can ask." For a long time they sat in silence, the letter heavy between them. The next morning, Embry met Ms. Winslade at the library. They had been working together quietly on a project that was quickly becoming something more. A manuscript, a book, not just her essay, but the stories of dozens of children like her, woven together into a testament of what silence costs. The teacher laid out pages across the table. "This is bigger than either of us realized. Publishers are already circling." Embry stared at the words, her words, printed in black ink. It felt surreal. She was 17, and yet people wanted to hear her voice. "Georgetown would give you the foundation to expand this," Ms. Winslade said carefully. "Policy, advocacy. You could change laws, change minds. Annapolis would make you a soldier. There's honor in both, but they're different kinds of power." Embry chewed her lip. "What if I don't want power?" Ms. Winslade smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's exactly why you should have it." The choice loomed. At dinner that night, the Colonel and Zephyr sat across from her, the tension palpable. The Colonel was pragmatic. "The academy is structure, discipline, honor. It's a chance to carry forward what your mother began." Zephyr was careful. "Georgetown is freedom, a wider field. You don't have to bleed to lead." Embry pushed her plate away, frustration boiling. "Do you even hear yourselves? One of you wants me to be her. The other wants me to be anything but. When do I just get to be me?" The silence after was heavy. Finally the Colonel leaned back, arms crossed. "You decide, Embry, no one else, but decide with your eyes open." That night she returned to the roof, the letter from Georgetown in one hand, the Naval Academy appointment in the other. The stars above felt indifferent as they always had. Her mother joined her again, quiet. After a while she asked, "What do you see up there?" Embry swallowed. "Possibility and distance." Zephyr nodded. "That's what choice is, both. You can't have one without the other." Embry closed her eyes, letting the night press against her. She didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time she felt like the choice was hers to make, not the town, not the country, not even her family. And that, maybe, was the point. How do you measure the weight of truth? By the medals pinned on a chest, or by the silence that finally breaks? Summer came quietly to Mercer County. The pool shimmered beneath the sun, its surface broken by the splashes of children learning to swim. Embry stood at the edge, whistle around her neck, a group of girls lined up beside her. "Weighted ankles," she told them, dropping a pair into the water. "It won't be easy. You'll want to quit, but that's the point." They groaned, rolled their eyes, but none of them backed away. From the bleachers, Zephyr watched, posture relaxed for once. Her presence was no longer a secret. Parents waved when she arrived, veterans stopped by to shake her hand, and children whispered in awe that Commander Callister had come to their small-town pool. Embry caught her mother's gaze. A silent exchange passed between them, pride, humor, the memory of a hearing where truth had nearly broken them both. "Tomorrow 5 a.m., Embry told the girls. "Don't be late." When the session ended, Warren Pike wheeled onto the deck, his granddaughter trailing behind, her eyes sharp with determination. "Commander," Pike said, his voice formal but warm, "Skylar here wants to join." Zephyr studied the girl with a professional's eye. "It's demanding training, not recreational." Skylar lifted her chin. "I can do demanding." Embry smiled, recognizing the fire in her expression. "Tomorrow morning, then." Pike lingered as the others left. He glanced at Zephyr, then Embry. "They're building a statue, you know, at the memorial." Zephyr grimaced. "Unnecessary." "Maybe," Pike admitted. "But girls like Skylar need to see it, need to know the path exists, even when the world tells them it doesn't." Zephyr didn't argue. Later that week, Embry sat in her grandfather's study, surrounded by stacks of letters. He was sorting them with the same precision he'd once applied to battle plans, by state, by theme, by urgency. "You know," he said, not looking up, "your mother used to get letters like these. Families writing into a void, hoping someone out there knew they existed. She never got to read them until years later, but when she did, it meant everything." He pulled a single envelope from his pocket, worn at the edges. "This one's for you." Embry opened it carefully. The seal was unmistakable, the president's crest. She read aloud, her voice barely steady. "You and your mother are invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Your testimony has changed policy, and your mother will be honored again, not just for her service, but for what her visibility means to future generations." Her breath caught. The colonel leaned back, eyes shining despite his stoicism. "History doesn't happen overnight," he said, "but sometimes it starts with one voice refusing to stay quiet." That night Embry sat again on the roof, her place of vigil, her place of thought. The stars stretched endless above, the same stars she had searched as a child, hopping for a sign. This time she didn't search, she simply looked. Her mother joined her, metal glinting faintly in the starlight. They sat shoulder to shoulder, silence wrapping around them. "Have you decided?" Zephyr asked softly. Embry held both letters in her hands. The appointment to the Naval Academy, the acceptance to Georgetown, both heavy, both possibilities. "I think so," she said. Zephyr didn't press, didn't ask which. She simply nodded as if the act of deciding was victory enough. Embry rested her head against her mother's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, the secrecy, the years you missed?" Zephyr's breath caught. "Every day. But regret isn't the same as shame. I don't regret the service. I regret the silence it demanded. That's why I won't ask you to follow me, only to walk your own path." Embry closed her eyes. For the first time, the choice felt less like a burden and more like a gift. Weeks later, they stood together in Washington again, this time at the Correspondents' Dinner. The ballroom buzzed with chatter, cameras flashing, but Embry felt steady in her honorary uniform. At her side, Zephyr was a pillar of calm. When the president spoke, he didn't just honor Zephyr. He honored the 23 women declassified with her. He honored the families who had lived in silence. And he spoke Embry's name, acknowledging her testimony as the spark that turned private shadows into public truth. The applause was thunderous. But for Embry, the moment wasn't about applause. It was about turning and seeing the faces in the crowd. Young women in academy uniforms, staffers, daughters, sons, all looking at her as though her story was somehow theirs. One approached her after the ceremony, barely 19, in crisp navy whites. "Was it worth it?" she asked. Embry hesitated. She thought of the community center, the laughter, the crushing silence. She thought of the compound in her mother's story, the hostage carried through the dark. She thought of the letters, the girls at the pool, the choice still pressing against her ribs. Finally, she said softly, "It's worth it if the doors stay open, if the silence, once broken, never returns." The young woman nodded, eyes bright with understanding. Later that night, as the city lights stretched below, Embry caught her mother's gaze across the room. Zephyr offered the same signal they had shared in the community center months before, a small nod. Back then it had meant stay strong, give nothing away. Now it meant something different. Well done, everything has changed. Embry exhaled. The choice before her still loomed, but it was hers now, hers alone. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world listens.